This is the after credits review of Licorice Pizza for Intercut. I'm Zachary Shevich with Arturo Zurita, and we're joined by Taylor J. Williams for this after credits review. Really excited to have you with us. Talk PTA. We're doing a lot of PTA talk today, focusing on his latest film, a coming-of-age tale set in California, a sprawling adventure of young love. Taylor, PTA is a filmmaker who operates under his own rhythm. I thought you had an interesting analysis of what watching Licorice Pizza felt like in your Letterboxd review. Do you mind explaining what your reaction was to his movie?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me back on. Always a good time to be here.
It's always a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, I feel like a little bit with The Master, but more so with Phantom Thread. He introduced this rhythm, this sort of back and forthness of the central relationship, where it's not so much we're following a 3-act meet cute, will they, won't they, whatever, but more so the trials and tribulations, I guess, of their relationship. So there's a sense of on and off. They're fighting and then they get along, they're fighting and then they get along. And I feel like this is sort of not necessarily an excuse, but that's just sort of his narrative framework to do all sorts of wacky set pieces and shenanigans. It's interesting that he sort of started that with Phantom Thread because it feels so removed from his other work and a lot more subdued and I guess sophisticated, even though I feel like at its core that film is just as silly as Licorice Pizza. But yeah, I do feel like with this film he's sort of taking that approach. He's like, okay, it worked with the last one, let me get back into a more comfortable groove.
Yeah, that like weight of importance that follows a film like Phantom Thread just because of maybe its setting, maybe because of the character's age or something like that, or maybe just the circumstances there. That weight is not as present in Licorice Pizza. It's maybe his most weightless movie. I would say maybe his most weightless movie ever. It's just kind of a pleasure from start to finish for me. And I like what you're getting at with that sense of like little sections, little stretches. It's kind of episodic. Almost like, the film breathes in and then it breathes out a little bit in terms of how the tension works. And it doesn't have that kind of traditional rise in tension and then fall before the third act. It has just little spurts of energy. For me, I love a movie where young people just kind of have too much time on their hands and use it to hatch up schemes and cause trouble. For me, it gave me a lot of that. Art, I know you weren't as taken with the way that the film was structured. Was it too loose for you?
No, not necessarily. I think it has probably one of the biggest things that it has going for it is the script, because I think his whole approach to the characters would have been obviously there's the whole story. Paul Thomas Anderson had a crush on his music teacher. His music teacher ends up being the mom of Alana Haim, whose sisters also appear in the movie. The mom also appears in the movie. Mm-hmm. But then there's also the factor that like he kind of toured with her, I guess. So he wanted her to be herself. Like it's one of those performances where it's like I think she's the better actor of the two in the movie. But to a degree, she's playing herself because everyone's like loving her performance in this movie. And then I see her tour video, how they're gonna go back on tour, and I was like, it's her. This is her fully up on screen. And he ended up casting obviously Hoffman Jr. over here to be her counterpart to it, and I think they play well off of each other, but I think the script definitely has a cohesive beginning, middle, and honestly end. I'm actually surprised the more that I think about the ending, because the way that they play with characters that you see in the trailer, they come in for set pieces way later on. Like they come in for a moment and then kind of dip, but they're really there to reinforce things for the characters. So it's not as loose really in retrospect than you think about it. The more looseness is in the performances. He talked about how for Cooper, to make sure that he was just playing a variation of himself, they were shooting at 3 p.m. because the boy woke up at 11. And he never wanted him to feel like he was going to be on set, that he was on a day of work, that he was still just playing a form of himself. But no, I think the best part of the movie would be its script. Do I have problems and issues with the script? Here and there, but for the most part, I think he really gets that vibe down of what he was going for with the 70s feel, with just the moments where you're hanging out with these characters. Yeah, there's big pieces, but there's some supporting characters that'll come in and just steal the show, be it from the casting director or just moments dealing with, I'll just say, something's on neutral. And that carries the whole scene. Those are set pieces that definitely were standouts.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I was listening to an interview with Paul, and he was talking about the idea of casting these relative unknowns and how he actually feels like movie audiences are willing to take a risk on a face they're not familiar with when you start the movie and you kind of are learning who they are and you go on that adventure with them. And then after you spend some time with them, you can bring in some movie stars and kind of change the energy of a film. And I feel like you definitely feel that with Licorice Pizza. But you brought up a lot of the great moments. It's a movie of a lot of great moments, I think. The rolling sequence maybe being the highlight for sure. Taylor, did you have any favorite moments from Licorice Pizza?
Yeah, I feel like all those back half set pieces, definitely the rolling. Yeah, I feel like when it gets to, I guess, the mattress store opening, that at that point it kind of feels like a pretty typical pacing coming of age summer romance or whatever. And I'm like, I've been enjoying this. This has been a sweet ride. And it feels like it's almost over. And then Sean Penn rolls up. Yeah. And you're like, oh, wait, I forgot I watched the trailer for this movie.
He's in
and
it.
There are all these people who haven't been in this hour and a half I've been watching yet. And then it's just like another straight hour of just set piece after. Because I remember watching
Pure
the trailer.
pleasures.
Yeah, watching the trailer, I was like, how is this all sort of related narratively? And it's not. It's just kind of one thing after another. But I think in that sense it's almost, I don't know, in my review I likened it to an album. I mean, a lot of movies you can do that, but it really feels like track after track more so than a sprawling narrative. But sort of like Phantom Thread, I feel like with the back and forthness of it, there's still like a 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. It's still like a gradually progressing relationship. At the end, like we've traveled some distance. It's not a pure 50-50 ebb and flow. And so I think that sort of refined pacing is one of his strengths at this point. Because I also feel like to an extent the master introduced that. Maybe even There Will Be Blood. I feel like the master is when he really started to loosen his storytelling. But specifically that on and off relationship, I feel, has been the last two.
All those later PTA films, I feel like their rhythm is a little bit hard to pick up, maybe on your first watch through, or maybe even just in like the first half of your first watch through. But once you settle into the type of story he's trying to deliver, there's something that just really works well about it. And it feels very adolescent to me in terms of how it's being told here, and just all these ideas. Especially you mentioned the whole waterbed store, just the whole idea of these kids by themselves essentially launching and running this business and doing deliveries. It's so fanciful that like it's almost enough to call the movie a fantasy rather than like a comedy drama. But that's one of the things that I love about it, is how kind of like playful this one is. It really feels like him cutting loose and maybe making a film that, his kids might like.
They're in it.
Yeah, they're in it, and some of their friends are in it in parts too. So, family affair.
Spielberg's daughter was in it briefly.
DiCaprio's dad in it briefly.
Everybody.
I still think it should have been called Soggy Bottom.
I agree. I think that would have been better. It fits into the movie. There are a couple of controversies that have popped up in the initial reactions to the film. I think the one that I've spent a little bit more time trying to read up on is the use of John Michael Higgins's racist Asian voice at one point in the film. PTA told the New York Times, quote, "I think it would be a mistake to tell a period film through the eyes of 2021. You can't have a crystal ball. You have to be honest to that time. Not that it wouldn't happen right now. By the way, my mother-in-law is Japanese and my father-in-law is white, so seeing people speak English to her with a Japanese accent is something that happens all the time. I don't even think they know they're doing it." So that's Paul Thomas Anderson's, I guess, response to that moment. Dave Chen's Letterboxd review, I thought, put it really well, and I'll leave a link to that in the description down below. But he pointed out how uncomfortable it is as an Asian person to be surrounded in a room of people laughing and not necessarily being able to decipher where those laughs are coming from. I do kind of see it both ways. I don't know if either of you had thoughts on the specific use of that caricature in those two moments.
Goofy. I feel like even with both controversies in it, this one and obviously the one that's been most of the discussion, is that a lot of it comes down to the reception of the audience. Like, it's not even so much whatever the movie's trying to say, but it's how people receive it. Because I don't think that it's saying that the guy is, you're supposed to laugh with him, but at the same time, it is a joke that's there that when you're watching it with an audience, the audience I saw it with, everyone laughed the first time he does it because he's imitating an Asian voice stereotype. And then the second time around, they got quieter. And then they got quieter. And then when it comes to the ending credits, when everyone appears on screen, they almost felt guilty for clapping at it. So there's a point in it where it does make me go like, yeah, it's kind of bogus for it to be in there. Because one, I know it's like of the times, but there's a lot of other things that were happening in the 70s in LA that could also be shown or not shown. But what you keep in there, what does it end up becoming like a Rorschach test for the audience? Because that's how I felt in my jam-packed screening of it and how people received it. And I could definitely see some people who have come out and just said, nah, I think it's funny. So there is that balance of it. I don't think that is on PTA. I know, like you said, he's got his own personal perspective to it. How that's received by audiences, again, I guess is the issue, which even comes into the bigger one that comes into play. But I don't know how it was when you guys saw it, but...
Yeah, it was kind of a mixed response when I watched it. I mean, obviously the film isn't like, he's obviously the butt of that joke.
Yeah.
But I do see, particularly the part where he's got a new wife, I can see that being a little more towing the line. Mm-hmm. I still think at the end of the day, he's the butt of that joke as well. But that's a little more like,
I
don't know.
I thought they were bland.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like, the intent on those jokes is good, but maybe they're handled a little bit more clumsily than I would have liked given the material. And that's just not something that I normally attribute to PTA is clumsily handling of a joke. But yeah, it's just in a movie full of moments that I thought really worked for me, that one didn't work for me as well. Or maybe it would have worked better if I wasn't surrounded by people.
That
but
too.
I don't know. And then Art alluded to the other controversy is this whole uproar, I guess, about the age gap between Cooper Hoffman and Alana Haim and their characters in the movie, being that Cooper's character, I think, is supposed to be 15 and Alana's supposed to be 25. And this one, like, I guess I see both sides of it, but ultimately I just think this whole thing is such an adolescent fantasy, and it's so clearly, like, done from the perspective of like a 16-year-old girl, a 16-year-old boy rather, like just having this gigantic crush on an older woman, and what happens is so tame that I just don't really have an issue with the movie's depiction of it. But I don't know if either of you guys felt weird at any point given the storyline.
I mean, personally, whether or not like her being 25 is canon, obviously there's a big age gap. I remember when she first said it, I thought she was just kind of thwarting him off, and so she was sort of upscaling her age, which she does later with Bradley Cooper.
28.
But, yeah, right, exactly. But like, even if she's not, well, like you said, it's really tame what does happen. I think it, gives us enough time with the character, because I mean, what is the period of the timeline of, I think, we're like, how much time elapses?
That was like a summer,
because
it has to be months. Feels like
on one hand it feels like a summer, but I feel like so much happens it could easily be well over a year. But again, like, we spend enough time with the characters and see how they sort of understand each other and play into each other, and Gary is this, like, 40-year-old man in a 15-year-old body or whatever. And obviously, like, I do get it. Like, a 15-year-old asks you out on a date and you go, yeah, I see people reading into the character that way. But also, I think the bigger thing is to look into the macro and see PTA, like, making this movie about basically his teacher.
Literally.
Mm-hmm.
It's very weird, but the sort of weird that I feel like his best films tap into. I mean, Phantom Thread has a lot of mommy issues, we'll call it, that I think are present here. And so I think for that reason it's interesting psychologically what he's sort of revealing about himself. But at the end of the day, like, he and the Haim family are like
family.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm sure it was all sort of, discussed and developed with that in mind.
Yeah.
So,
for sure.
It's still weird if you flip them. You flip them, you get a completely different outrage, I think, for the movie. I don't think for the intention, like, you should be able to make a movie like this. Like, even Red Rocket, another one that gets even further into it. You don't have that same scenario here, and that is one that flips it, and one that you're not really rooting for the character as much as you're seeing how crazy that character could become. I think the reason a lot of people have the, I guess, pushback for it is because, like we were discussing, Taylor saying it is a relationship movie, and towards the end of it, since we are talking spoilers, it is them kind of finding that. And there is a third act character that gets introduced, played by Benny Safdie, who absolutely killed it in the movie, where you realize that there's a certain point where she thinks, I was trying to get with Penn, I was trying to, even get with him as she gets invited. And it's in that conversation where she realizes that this man has to have a hidden relationship because he's trying to run for politics.
Office.
Yeah. That she then is able to connect that if he's got to hide his relationship, then maybe I shouldn't have to hide mine. And I think that's what gets people into that iffy scenario. And I think that's to a degree, valid criticism for sure. I don't know. I think it's a lot stickier than what it is, but I don't think that means that you shouldn't be able to make a movie like this and not be smart enough to know what is on screen and what isn't on screen. What people take from it, again, though, you still have like, if we can admit that with the Asian joke, that none of us think that he's being racist in putting that joke in the movie, but how do people receive it? Are you responsible for how people receive something? I wouldn't like to think so, but you've had these movies for a while, all the way to Call Me By Your Name, a movie that I absolutely fell in love with, and then you look back and you realize, they got the same age gap thing going on there. And I think it's more so just because he plays a 15-year-old. You're dealing with something that isn't so much an age gap for two consenting adults, but I guess that he's younger. But with the flip also being that he practically is a 40-year-old man in a 15-year-old's body. And then whatever Alana ends up being, because there's like three ages that are given.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that you're getting at there is that ultimately this is fictional, and
it is
like
fiction.
It's different from endorsing them dating in real life to endorsing this vision of a movie. And I think there's a difference between depiction and endorsement, right? Like just because you depict something doesn't mean you endorse it.
My boy Cooper should have stuck to himself, though. I'm sorry. No offense to a lot of them. My boy was selling his pinball machines and everything, and she kept holding him back.
You mentioned Benny Safdie. Let's talk a little bit about some of the favorite performances, because there's a lot of really great performances in this one. Taylor, which actors stuck out to you?
Yeah, Benny was great. Bradley Cooper was good. He wasn't in it nearly as much as they sort of advertised. I guess none of them were. Yeah, it's
sort of an extended cameo, but
he's
really funny.
They sort of all were. I thought Tom Waits was great. I don't know, all the sort of higher ups that they advertised in the trailer. Sean Penn was also good.
Yeah,
you mentioned the casting director,
Harriet Sansom Harris. She's amazing.
Steals the show.
In that one scene, like that, just the eye twitching, crazy thing under the surface there was hilarious.
Oh, I loved. What's his name from Booksmart and whatever else? The guy who plays the other actor.
Skyler Gisondo. Yeah. Gary's actor friend with the smug face who goes to dinner at Alana's house. I thought he was really great.
Yeah, I thought he was great. I wanted a little more of him. But yeah, I think another strength of the movie is that we never really get tired of anyone. It leaves us wanting like just a little bit more of everyone.
Totally.
And I think that lends itself to rewatchability.
Absolutely. Do you expect the film will be up for any Oscars? Are you hoping it's up for any Oscars, Art?
I think it might just get script, but when we were looking at the Globes, I know a lot of people are pushing Alana, but I don't know. I feel like just script.
I'd be really happy to see Alana get in there. Taylor, do you have any thoughts?
I think definitely script, probably cinematography also.
Yeah.
Yo, y'all
Maybe
like it?
Best Picture.
Here's my thing with
Were
it. I
you
got to
not
say, no,
big
I do
on it?
think it's good. It's just, I know the intent was for it to be blown out, and we got to catch a 70 millimeter of it. So it's like there's so many shots where they're just like glowing, and I was like, okay, maybe I have to catch it again and see it from the perspective of this is what he's going for. But I wasn't sure if it was just our 70 millimeter was broken or not. But yeah, no, there was some really beautiful shots, especially the night shots I thought were fantastic.
Yeah. And all the shots of running. PTA loves his characters running. Yeah, I would love to see it get into script for sure, into cinematography. I'd love to see Alana Haim get recognized, because I thought that performance was great. I hope it gets into picture. We're going to have 10 Best Picture nominees this year. It definitely feels like one of the 10 best movies I've seen this year. Where does this movie rank among PTAs for you? Is this one of your favorite PTA movies, one of your least favorite PTA movies, kind of middle tier PTA? What do you think, Taylor?
For me, it's kind of higher middle. I don't know if I should say my top 3 before we get into the bracket.
We'll get to that.
Okay, yeah. I'll say top middle for now.
Cool.
There are a couple others that I would still like to rewatch to sort of reassess, specifically for where Licorice Pizza lies among them, but it's definitely up there.
Arturo?
Probably middle. I don't know if it'd be top middle, but just directly in the middle.
Yeah, I think I'm in the middle as well, but with me, just about every PTA movie I've seen has grown in my estimation since I first saw it. So being that it's fresh, I want to marinate on it. I want to get that rewatch in. I want to absorb it in every way I can, and then maybe it will continue to rise up my PTA rankings. But I did really, really love my time in the theater with this movie. I can't wait to see it again. I'm glad you guys seem to like it as well. Let us know what your thoughts are on Licorice Pizza in the comments down below, or by shooting us an email, intercutpod@gmail.com, or hitting us up on social media @intercutpod.